This is the Crucible, the JRTC Experience.
Taking fire from vicinity, East Owsley Rock Country. Fire the kilo code 33111 over. Roger, stand by.
5+3 clear! Fire!
This is Light Fighter Lessons. In this series, we discuss infantry warfighting skills and lessons learned in a decisive action training environment for large-scale combat operations at JRTC.
Hi, I'm Colonel Matt Hardman, the Commander of Operations Group here at the Joint Readiness Training Center, and I'm joined with the illustrious and mighty Golden Dragon 7 Command Sergeant Major Lachnit. So, Sergeant Major, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, sir. I joined the Army June of 2000. I'm from a small town in northern Idaho. I'm married to my great wife of 21 years and have 3 children. Spend a lot of time deer hunting.
Are you any good at it?
I'm pretty decent at it, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, some would disagree, but I'm pretty decent at it.
The
sir.
deer would agree.
The deer would definitely agree, sir.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, sir. I actually joined the Army. I'm full-blown colorblind, so I enlisted in the Army as a pack clerk. I come from a long line of soldiers, so I still want to do my duty.
I gotta ask, where'd you start out as a pack clerk?
I started out in Korea, sir.
Okay.
And then 9/11 happened very soon after that, and I met someone that said, maybe if you go to Ranger Regiment, they'll let you reclass to be an infantry. And went to 2nd Ranger Battalion after RIP, and they let me reclass to be an infantryman, sir.
But you went to RIP as a
I did.
pack clerk.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That's awesome.
Yep.
All right, so you're probably pretty good at the admin stuff too.
They let me reclass pretty quick after.
Okay. Your strengths were elsewhere.
They were, sure, yes.
All right, and so 2nd Ranger Battalion, where'd you start out in 2nd Ranger Battalion?
I started out in the S1 shop for a very brief moment.
Yeah.
And I went to Bravo Company. I was there from 2003 to 2014 or 15.
Okay.
So served every position from the new guy to a platoon sergeant Bravo Company. And then I became the Recce platoon sergeant. And then shortly after that, I went to 375 as a first sergeant and ops sergeant major.
Okay. Do you know Captain Dave Sprague by chance?
Yes.
Or
I
now
do.
Major?
Very well. He was in my company. So,
Okay. Yeah, he was a AS3 for me and a company commander.
Okay.
And like one of my favorite human beings on the planet. So Dave, you got a shout out.
Yeah, he was my XO as a first sergeant, so I know him very well.
Yeah, awesome. We'll talk a little bit more about him later, I guess, off camera. And so, how did those experiences shape you in the Ranger Regiment? I mean, here you are, Battalion Sergeant Major, 2nd Brigade, 10th Mountain Division, 214 Golden Dragons, first time back in a conventional unit since Korea, is that right?
Yes, sir. About 20 years.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And so, how did your experiences in the Ranger Regiment shape the way you thought about being a Sergeant Major?
I think from a very young soldier, I think I had the best fire team leader that God's ever produced.
Who was your team leader?
Zach Dean was his name. And I think that his ability to show me attention to detail, discipline, but not just don't put your hands in your pocket discipline, but actual discipline on staying awake during an ambush when it's 10 hours and you don't see anything. His attention to detail on PCI and PCCs, I think he really made me the soldier I am today. And that is the goal for my battalion, is to become that disciplined. So. Yeah,
that's awesome. And it's the difference that sometimes maybe people don't even realize they've made in our lives.
Absolutely.
That's a huge testament to him. All right, so as you were thinking about coming to be a battalion sergeant major, what were the things that you were focused on? And my follow-up question is, hey, how has some of that changed over time?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I was a little bit terrified. I think the first meeting I was in as a battalion sergeant major, I didn't understand about 100 of the acronyms that were said, just because I didn't know what a CTCP was, an FTCP. I did not go to the Sergeant Major's Academy. I went to the SOCOM one.
Yeah.
And so I think I was most worried about not having the doctrinal background or understanding the expertise that is required of a command sergeant major. Luckily, I had the right brigade sergeant major to help me out a lot. But initially, I thought I was going to come in and focus on tactics, focus on getting soldiers to a higher level, really focusing on tactics. And I quickly realized that should not be my number one focus. Instead, it was how do we become a disciplined organization and serve the brigade's needs and make the brigade better. Kind of being better for the brigade instead of being the best in the brigade is kind of the shift that I made.
Well, you're like speaking my love language, and that's a hard mental transition in a lot of ways. I mean, for many of us coming up in direct level leadership at the company level, you know, it's trying to be the very, very best. I mean, that competitiveness, which is great and drives us in a lot of ways. But what you described is really, in a lot of ways, harder.
It is, sir. Yes, absolutely.
So, what caused you to make that mental shift that I've got to be the best for the brigade, not the best necessarily in the brigade?
I think it was about 18 months ago. We were conducting a brigade training, and I thought we were doing very, very well. And I didn't realize the burden we were putting on the brigade by some of the sustainment requirements we were not forecasting was hurting the brigade and ultimately the overall mission. And it was kind of a sobering moment that I'm here to fight for the brigade, and it's not solely just a battalion operation. And I think that was a very hard transition from the Ranger Regiment, because as a first sergeant, I never worried about sustainment. That was always someone else's problem. And so I think that was a major transition, was the sustainment that we needed to provide.
Yeah, and I mean, in large-scale combat now, you know, new FM 30 operations manual out in the fall, and the vision, the principle, tactical formation, in some respects is even pulling up more. We fight a brigade as part, you know, it's a big team, right? It's just, right now it's the 7 battalions in the brigade headquarters, and if we're not doing our part, then that impacts, you know, adjacent units. And that's one of the things I think that the combat training centers expose. I mean, because we're always fighting as a bigger team. And we have our actions and inactions have positive and negative impacts on those around us. I mean, clearly we have to be good at what we do. But we got to be, to your point, we got to be mindful of the consequences that we're having on our higher headquarters as well as adjacent units. What are some examples in this rotation here, 2304 Joint Readiness Training Center? What are some examples of where you saw that play out, good and bad, of you know, our actions or interactions, you know, having impacts up and laterally?
Yeah, I think to start with the good, I think the first one is the ability for the sergeant majors to crosstalk about CASEVAC operations. Starting in the rotation, we were very much in our own bubble. And so our died of wounds rate was not where it should be at. It should be 0, but
yeah.
So we quickly realized that if we can help each other out, and that made me that our role 1 is not exactly where I want it, but it's the best spot for the brigade, for my role 1. Because at the end of the day, it's our role 1. And so we were able to CASEVAC casualties much faster by helping each other out. So I think that was a positive.
Yeah.
The negative one was,
I mean, we came in, you know, good, but like we got
yes.
way better
Absolutely.
as the
Yeah.
brigade sergeant majors or the sergeant majors in the brigade saw the whole field.
100%, sir.
Right.
And the sustainment rehearsal really pushed that. I don't think Sergeant Major Donaldson made the decision to have the battalion sergeant majors go to the sustainment rehearsal.
Yeah, and at first you were probably all like,
Got it, yes, sir. Initially, I was I had other things to do, but what came out of that was a really good shared understanding of how we can help each other out.
Yeah.
So it worked really, really well.
How did you, I mean, let me pull on that for a second. How did that rehearsal get better over time? Because it started out like, you know, and Sergeant Major Donaldson was like not awesome and he wasn't happy.
Yeah.
How did it get better over time?
I think 2 things. One is we had the right people there.
Yeah.
And then 2 was we knew what information to bring to that sustainment rehearsal. The first couple, we were definitely trying to figure out. There's information that for the brigade they needed, and we just didn't have it. And so
Yeah.
I think.
So give me some examples.
I think it was like the what we had on hand, what we forecasted we'd need, and then how we could help each other out. Because we ended up having conversations before we even went to the same rehearsal with the other battalion sergeant majors on how we could help each other out.
Yeah, I worked for with a pretty smart guy, John Work. You know, he talks about like rehearsals and meetings. Like 80% of what gets done before we ever show up.
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
if we don't come with our homework, we got no chance.
Yes,
and
sir.
so we got better at coming with our homework. We came with log stat. We came with our forecast, understanding where our CT, combat trains command posts were going to be located.
Mm-hmm.
And then you talked about the people. So obviously you got the opportunity to go to the sustainment. But then the Brigade 3 started coming to the brigade sustainment rehearsals too.
Yeah.
And that made a difference.
It did, because instead of just talking about where we're at now, he was able to kind of forecast what the current operations, what the future operations were going to be. And I think, I mean, you've said it before, sir, to be a participant, not an attendee. And I think that initially I went there to be an attendee. But I would strongly encourage other units to bring the right people to those meetings. And a lot of times that is the sergeant major. He has the experience to kind of see what's going to happen next, I think.
Well, and I also think like battalion sergeant majors come out of that with the understanding of what the problems are, and they have the gravitas by position to fix a lot of those things.
Absolutely, sir. I think, and because it's my first CTC rotation, I lean very heavily on my other two infantry sergeant majors.
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, we're going to talk about that in a minute.
But they were able to really give me some good ideas. So I think enabling the brigade, but also just cross-leveling between the maneuver battalions. And an easy example is knowing that one of my other fellow sergeant majors was planning on doing a log run that I was not tracking. Our G-lock was not open, and so he was able to move those supplies forward to allow us to get Class 1 a lot faster. And so the crosstalk really helped out.
Teamwork makes the dream
It
work.
does, sir, yes.
What were the critical outputs from that sustainment rehearsal?
Right off the top, easily was a med cop. We did not have one as a brigade, and a good news story is because of that med cop, one of my first sergeants was not able to get a hold of the battalion, but was able to get a hold of an adjacent battalion, and used his Roll 1 and evac to get those soldiers out.
And in anywhere, but particularly in large-scale combat, that's going to be the difference between America's sons and daughters
Absolutely.
living and dying.
Yes.
And I've seen a lot of CTC rotations, and I'm of the firm belief that if we put a med cop in a first sergeant's hand, like we got a chance.
Yes, sir.
Because they're going to move heaven and earth. They're going to get our wounded where they need to be. But if we don't get that med cop in their hand, like we're just not giving them a chance.
Yes, sir. And to First Sergeant Banner's credit, I mean, he did it.
Yeah, isn't it like awesome to get to see
was.
that and be a part of it?
Yeah, and he could not get him on FM. On that med cop, we had the JBC roll names, and so I give him a lot of credit for. And I think that's another subject completely different, but I think leaders leading through action and not just waiting for someone else to solve their problem.
Yeah.
That's a great example of it. Is my battalion can't solve this problem for right now. I'm going to figure out a way to solve it.
Yeah. No, and absolutely, and we can talk a little bit more about that with non-commissioned officers in large-scale combat. On the sustainment part, if you could take the time machine and I gave you a day to train sustainment at the battalion and brigade level, what would you do?
I think it all revolves around to putting ourselves in an uncomfortable position of just being in the field and not. There's no white van coming to drop off muffins. Like there will be an LRP that's set up, and
it may or may not have muffins.
It probably won't. But I think if I could go back and do it all over again, the last 2 years we would have been doing combat sustainment in training.
At every opportunity.
Absolutely, and I think that if the log stack wasn't right, then the company's going to figure out how to fight through it. And I think we did okay at that in the train up, but we're not a T at it.
Yeah, I mean, I was a support platoon leader as a lieutenant, and it was like kind of a smaller than FSC, bigger than a distro platoon. And the rule was like if you didn't turn in log stat, you didn't get hot chow.
Yeah.
And it only happened once when I was support platoon leader. And then they figured it out.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's unfortunate, but that's kind of how we unfortunately learn sometimes. I think one of the challenges, and your team figured it out, I mean, the brigade figured it out, but I think we struggle, if we haven't had the opportunity to maneuver as a brigade, we struggle to understand the scale and scope of this thing. And so we got like really smart people, first sergeant, sergeant majors, FSC commanders. But, you know, if we had the opportunity to do it tabletop, do a sustainment rehearsal, and then execute it as a toot, we'd work through a lot of this understanding of why the MedCop matters, why we need to make sure the first sergeant has the role names of, you know, adjacent units so they can action and drive it, and then understand how this whole really enterprise actually runs.
Yes, sir.
All the way from the division support area to the BSB, from the FSCs to the LRPs. I think that it's hard to visualize and understand it if you don't see it in execution. And so I agree with you. I mean, I think the executing tactical sustainment as a way of life is a huge part of it. But then the other is like showing people at scale what this looks like. So at least we come in practice before we're scrimmaging here at JRTC.
Yeah, I agree, sir. I think we probably missed an opportunity to do that. I know we did. It's so easy, I think, and especially in a maneuver battalion, to think about maneuver.
Right.
And what I've learned,
the broccoli eating is like really important.
it is, and what I've learned in the last 2 weeks is that maneuver doesn't matter if that sustainment's not going to be there. The water thing, the water issue, especially coming from Fort Drum here, was not. I mean, we had almost 100-degree shift, and
You're welcome.
yeah. But I do think that like the opportunity we missed an opportunity that we do those things. We just need to do them under stress. There's no difference between drawing water and putting it in a white van than drawing water and putting it in a Humvee, except for it becomes way, way harder.
Yeah.
And so I think we probably missed an opportunity. If I was doing it all over again, platoon live fire, company live fire, we would have stressed those systems.
Yeah. Gravitating towards friction.
Yeah.
And we want to embrace the friction. Frankly, when we can compartmentalize it a little bit in training, so that we can figure out how to solve it, and it becomes a habit how to solve it.
Yes, sir.
Versus waiting till we have all the opportunity to solve all the friction all at once.
Yes, sir.
Because this place is a friction factory.
It is, sir. Yeah, it's the deep end of the pool.
It is the deep end of the pool. All right, so first JRTC rotation.
Yes, sir.
Right, long-time listener, first-time caller. What'd you think?
I'll tell you, sir, that not because I'm doing this podcast with you, but I honestly, I think it's probably density, a training event is probably the best I've done because you have to operate in a very stressful environment, and it's hard. And I think that I've probably let myself off the hook, and probably my subordinates off the hook, by not making those decisions have to be made in a very stressful environment.
Yeah.
I think it's probably the best training without actually getting shot at, because of the duration, because of the tempo of it. I think it's probably the best training I've been a part of, and I feel like I can say I've been a part of some really good training.
Yeah, I think so too.
So it's really, it's unlike anything I've ever done.
Well, I mean, that's what our charter is. I mean, my view is I got to give everybody here, ideally, the worst day of their life here, so that we're not doing it in combat. Because here, nobody is actually going to shoot at you, and we got a pretty good safety net with the OCTs and all this that we can afford, frankly, to fail.
Yes, sir.
And we learn from that, and then we get back up and we do it again and we do it again, and we can grow here and really figure it out. But it is complex problem solving under high stress every single day.
It is, sir.
Over and over again. What surprised you the most?
I think what surprised me the most, sir, was you've met me for a little bit now, sir. I'm kind of a glass half full kind of guy. I think what surprised me the most is identifying the leaders that can really be relied on. And I think the other thing was the challenges of the sustainment. I came in here really wanting to focus on maneuver, focus on tactics. I was comfortable in that arena. And what surprised me most was how hard it is to get water to the soldier's mouth. And it's challenging.
Yeah.
And I think that, and then doing that
Well,
with very little sleep is even more challenging.
Right. It's complex problem solving.
Yes, sir.
Because it's math.
It is.
I mean, that's like
It is.
it's math. I mean, you want soldiers to have water. They want to have water. It's a math problem.
It is.
I mean, it's like the worst world problem or word problem you could have, like on a, math exam, right? And there's just some real math behind it.
And I think Colonel Farmer could probably attest to it. I think he was standing there when I was trying to calculate how much water is needed per every kilometer based off of our trends, and that simple math was very challenging on a hood of a Humvee with no calculator. And so I thought it would be much easier to do that, get that sustainment. I've been told over and over again, focus on sustainment, and I'm focusing on sustainment now. But I think that surprised me. I would also say that the resiliency of the soldiers, I thought we were actually going to have more of a problem with, and when they got clear guidance and clear task and purpose, they actioned it.
I had an awesome experience with your Alpha company. So I went up, and I think at that point in the fight, your team had fought for almost, air assaulted in and had fought for almost 36 hours straight without sleep.
Yes, sir.
And I came across two soldiers that were digging a fighting position, and one was pulling security and one was digging, and they both were smiling. And I was like, okay, this has got to be like a setup. And I was like, so what have you all been up to? And one of them was Specialist Moyer. So he's out there. Hopefully you're going to watch this. And he's like, hey, sir, we just been fighting, walking, digging, fighting, walking, digging. And I asked how things were going. He's like, oh, it's great, sir. Like, we're getting ready, we're getting to do our job.
Yeah.
And I did. I walked away impressed with the attitude and mindset, of the soldiers. There's grittiness in 10th Mountain Soldiers that I'm partial to. But yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. And it's interesting you bring that up, because I think sometimes we have a tendency, get off my grass, but the kids are all right.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of what expectations do we put on them? How do we prepare them for these things? And if we prepare them right and we establish the right expectations, they're generally going to exceed those expectations.
Yeah, I could tell you, sir, that what we say about the generation of soldiers now is the same thing that they said about me, right?
Right.
So,
George Washington was standing there with some people,
100%.
right?
So I think the conversation about the next generation is not about the next generation, but the leaders that are leading them, and
Amen.
and how to lead them.
Right.
And so I think it's a leader problem. It's not a soldier problem.
Right. Okay. Well, let's talk about that.
It's a challenging problem, but I think it is a leader problem. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean
Opportunity.
Yeah, opportunity.
It's a leader opportunity.
We need to figure out how to do it. And,
Right.
And I think that there are challenges in there, but there are some opportunities.
Yeah.
And I feel like I take a lot of pride in our organization, not only the battalion, but the brigade, that it is not a soldier problem. It is how are we going to lead them? And so I think that it doesn't do us a whole lot of good to talk about the next generation, except for how to lead them.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Yeah. What do you think we need to do for generational change in our Army? Right. If we're going to be prepared to fight and win large-scale combat operations, we're good, but none of us, we're inherently not wired to be satisfied. What do we need to do to make generational changes to win that first fight in the next war?
I think it starts before the war, obviously. And I think the first one is, some people call it the why generation. I call it the intent generation. They just want to know the intent, and they're going to break their backs to make it happen. I think the other thing is I think it's easy to not hold them accountable. I think that they want expectations and they want to be held accountable. And I think that we are doing ourselves in the Army an injustice by not doing that. If what I've found with the new generation of soldiers is that if you give them intent, you give them a task and purpose, and then you hold them accountable, they're going to accomplish that. I think the ability of our leaders to know their soldiers and know their expectations and give them good task purpose will lead to success.
No, I agree. I mean, and I think that accountability's got to come from a place of love.
100%.
And once they, once they understand that intent, nobody likes being held accountable when we're being held accountable.
Yes, sir.
But when they understand the why and they understand that it's tied to helping them, one, be better human beings, and two, winning and surviving in combat. I'm with you. I tend to think that's the case. And you said the deep end of the pool, right? Like you can't cram for the swim test.
No, you can't.
Right. So how do we prepare our soldiers for the swim test?
I think it's got to be incremental, and I think that I could have done a much better job putting them in the kiddie pool during some other training events and preparing them for the deep end. A couple different ways. One is just tactically survivability, living in the field. Those lessons have got to be relearned. And by me as well. It's been a long time since I spent 14 days in the field.
Right.
And I mean, everything from how to take care of your feet to how to maintain your weapon system. But I think that, I don't know if me and my team would ever share a laugh, but I always knew he cared about me, and I would even say love me. And but it was done from a place of I knew he wanted me to be the best soldier that I could be. I gave a speech for the NCOA not too long ago, and I remember the words my team leader said to me. The first thing he said to me, he said, "You're now a member of this team. There's no initiations, only expectations." And from then on
Amen.
out,
like that, I want to run through walls for that guy.
Exactly, and that's, I remember calling my parents. I told this in the speech. I called my parents and said, "I found my home." Like,
oh,
you know what I mean? Like this is the guy I was meant to work for. And he also said, "This team will only succeed if you succeed, and my job is to make you successful." And like, we need those NCOs in our army.
So it was shared. I was a lieutenant at JBLM, and somebody gave me a bootleg printed off copy. This is before email was ubiquitous, of Sergeant Major Hall's The Fundamentals of Combat and How to Train for It. And the fundamental determinant of success or failure in combat is how a soldier feels about his or her peers and immediate leader.
Yes, sir.
And your team leader, no initiations, just expectations.
Yep.
I think is huge. I mean, training. If the training's hard enough, then we don't have to have any other
yes, sir, 100%.
rites of passage.
Yes, sir.
How do we get that?
Sir, I think it is shared. It's some shared hardship in the field, and I think that I don't know if I've ever been a part of a more tight team than my recce team, because it was shared hardship. And I think that there's the reception integration is wildly and majorly important.
Yeah.
But I think the more time that we just spend together, taking care of each other, and I think it's different. It's different than when I was a private. I think probably. My sergeant taking care of me was making sure that I knew how to balance my checkbook and take care of my feet. And so I think that the first step is just junior leaders taking care of soldiers. I think if a soldier feels like he's going to be taken care of, I think he'll do about it whatever it takes to win in combat.
Yeah, and I think to your earlier point, people like us have to acknowledge that we have to train
100%
and develop those sergeants to do that. And really, it's your level. You got to train platoon sergeants to train sergeants. I got to train first sergeants and company commanders to train staff sergeants.
And I think it's tough because time is an opportunity, not a challenge. Is the kind of the way we have to look at it, right? Like that, there is never enough time for anything, but developing leaders should be very high on the priority list.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I got some feedback of some surveys that had been done at the CTCs over the years, that there's this drop in believing that the CTCs develop people as leaders. That people don't see this as leader development. I would guess that most people don't see pulling staff duty or CQ as leader development.
Yeah.
But I would submit it can be, and it probably should be.
Absolutely.
right? And that leader development is like opportunities for leader development are all around us. It's not a PowerPoint slide deck.
I think that I agree, sir. I think this is a great opportunity for leader development. It's also a really good opportunity, if you're not careful, to lose the faith of some soldiers. And I think that as a leader, there's going to be a spotlight on you, because when everyone's tired and everyone's hungry, the soldiers are going to look at you and want to know what they can expect from you. So I think it's a great opportunity to show your soldiers that you're going to take care of them, that you're going to figure it out for them.
Yeah. Well, hey, I don't want to one thing that stands out with you, Sergeant Major, is your willingness to acknowledge mistakes.
Yeah.
Right. And your brigade commander, Colonel Wentz, same conversations when I talk to him, he starts out every conversation, well, I'm messing this up. I'm not doing this right. I need to do better at this. And, that's, I think, an important component of this, even for a brand new team leader is like, hey, we're not expecting you to do this perfect, but we are expecting you to be introspective about what you're doing and acknowledge when you make mistakes. And I personally think soldiers they understand that. 100%. They'll accept that a sergeant that's been a team leader for 90 days may not have figured it all out yet.
Yes, sir.
But we got to be transparent of our shortcomings.
Yes, sir.
This stuff's hard.
It is very hard. I remember telling you that, sir.
Yeah.
I can't, you lose track of time in the box.
Right. It's somewhere. It happened out there.
I was somewhere in there. I was probably a little bit tired, but I remember looking at you just saying, this is hard. Yeah, it's not easy, sir.
And, but I think if we're introspective and we're trying to get better every single day, I have an advantage, right? I've got a team of people that are looking at this, that get to see it. I get a little bit more sleep than you do. And so I can see over 14 days the growth, maybe sometimes in a way that when you're in the moment, the player, the person in the box, the man or woman in the arena can't. And very, very rare to ever see a unit not grow. Some units grow way faster. I think, your unit grew faster in part because of the leadership to be introspective and take responsibility. And I think that generationally, whether it's social media, that it's okay to not be perfect. We just have to be introspective about it and keep working at it. And it's an illusion to think that somebody's come down here and figured it all out, right? Because this is hard. You could put me back. I think I got 6 rotations now as a COG. You could put me back in command of a brigade, and I would still make a bunch of mistakes because this is hard. Right. And I'd learn new things. I'm learning something every single rotation, vicariously watching people in the arena struggle, work at these challenges that are out there. What did you learn about leader development watching some of your subordinates? What did you maybe take away of how you're going to pick some of them up and help them grow going forward?
Yeah, I think we owe it to the junior NCO. I think it's very easy for us to say he's not doing this, but I think the stuff that we need to fix, we also haven't taught them. And so I think an easy example is in the defense, going up into a fighting area and seeing the not good engagement areas, seeing the fighting just right on the road. Immediately I asked myself, what are we doing right now? But then I look back and we never talked about it. So there should be an expectation that they know what they're doing.
Right. They're not dumb people. They don't hate America. No. They just have never seen what right looks like.
100%. And I think that the 2nd Brigade doing the Mission Thursdays has helped out with that, where they are blocking time off for our junior leaders. Not just for our junior leaders, but for the senior NCOs to teach the junior leaders, which is hard to do, to pull an entire day out. But I think that, I don't know if I have been as methodical on figuring out what that glide path of those days looks like. And so I think one is just figuring out how are we going to train them on the stuff that we expect them to know, but they just don't know.
Yeah. I'm going to put you on the spot. Hot takes. If you were going to tell platoon sergeants, right? The level, 2 levels down from the battalion. If you were going to give 4 or 5 areas that you think, based off the sample size that you've seen, that platoon sergeants need to focus their self-development on, right? Because the 3 components of leader development are institutional, operational. We just did a big operational,
Yep.
and then self-development. What would be the 4 or 5 things that you would give platoon sergeants out there listening?
I think the first one is I don't think we have I don't, in my battalion, we don't have a good understanding of the defense, just because I don't think we've done it. And so I would ask them to get smart on the defense as fast as possible, so they can help their platoon leader, so the platoon leader is not having to do it for them.
So, okay, we're gonna riff on these as we go. So I'll give you the first one, 1939 Combined Arms Maneuver. It's CMH, you can find it. There's a chapter in there called Miracle about a platoon in the Ardennes that does a masterful job of this and holds up a division for the better part of 6 hours, and arguably has pretty significant impact on the outcome of the Battle of the Bulge. So if you were looking for a historical vignette, that's a good one. I think the other part of this is understanding our weapon systems.
100%, sir.
Right? I mean, to be able to do the defense, we have to understand what our weapons can and cannot do. And then I think a third part is, like, in the defense, is just go walk some terrain and think about how would I attack or defend this piece of terrain.
Yes.
Walking around with that mindfulness about defending. Okay, second,
Well,
self-development.
you stole my second one. So
Okay.
With the weapons one, but
we can
yeah,
loop into that.
Well, I think it is. I think the NCO creed is charged to be technically and tactically proficient. I think you can't do that without knowing the capabilities of the weapon system, specifically the AT stuff. I thought we'd focused on that a little bit, but no fault of them. It was a fault of us for not digging into it. But just the employment of the Javelin, of the AT systems, is how are we going to employ them in the most effective and survive it. And so I would really dig into any AT engagement stuff and the capability of the weapon systems, sir.
Yeah.
I think we did a C on it. I mean, I think we passed, but I don't think it was. I think we could do a whole lot better with it.
Right.
And then I think the next one would be understanding the supply system and how it affects everybody else. And the reality of the fact is we drank about half the brigade's water on the first day. And so really understanding, like, what does that consumption look like, and how does what I'm doing affect the brigade. I don't expect a platoon sergeant to be thinking too high about that, but he does need to understand the rates of march, and how consuming those class 1 is going to put a strain on the brigade.
Yeah, and I think which I think you all figured out here in execution, is get a stopwatch and time our SOP for how we fill water sources.
Yes, sir. Yeah, 100%.
Right, and how do we practice that? And that's got to be a drill, and we got to rehearse it. And once we understand that, that can be in our movement and maneuver equation, because it doesn't just happen.
No.
We really got to practice it. And I mean, at the platoon level, I think it's just, okay, hey, we did that in 21 minutes. Next time we're going to get it down under 20, and just really hammering away at it. And then, okay. And
I think the last one, sir, I mean, I could go on obviously for a while, but I think the last one is the patrol-based activities. I think it, not only do we need to survive in the patrol base, but
we got to thrive in them,
We got to thrive. And also, I think that just one of the things I didn't appreciate was the patrol-based activities and the ability for the battalion to transition to the next thing. The patrol-based activities at the platoon and company level really drive that. How long is it going to take it for us to get in, and how long is it going to take us to get out? We did an SOP for our patrol base, but we just did not do it enough. This is where Joe Lachnit's rucksack is going every time. I'm only taking one thing out of my rucksack at a time, so when the RD-Sim lands, I'm ready to go. And so I think if I was a platoon sergeant, I would focus a lot of time on patrol-based activities, occupying, and then how we're getting in and out.
Yeah, and that repetition of doing that simple, which isn't simple,
Right.
task. Not only does it make our unit better, but generationally, if we do it 100 times in a year, now we have an entire generation of sergeants and staff sergeants that are pretty good at it, and then they're teaching another generation, and this is ultimately how we get better at all this stuff.
Yeah.
So the things that we assume people know, they actually know, because like generationally it's become embedded in our DNA how we do these things.
Yeah, I think that one thing I did talk to one of my companies about is you're creating a standard, right? And so when you set up a patrol base, that is a private standard for probably the rest of his life. And I was fortunate enough to have the right team that gave me the right standard. But I think that if we can figure that out in training, then we can come here and execute, and that is the standard.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of
Well, and right, new soldiers show up and they're
Yeah.
valuable,
absolutely.
right? I mean, they walk in and like they go out to the field for the first time, and if that's how they do it to the standard, they're not going to expect any different. Every time I go to the field, this is how this is.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's why it's so important in training that we have to be careful that we're not setting a false expectation of when we're going to squad live fire, when we're going to platoon live fire, it's an operation, and we're going to occupy. Maybe there's some more rest required, but it's part of the priorities of work. It's not something we just do. And so I've learned that every private is watching me all the time, and so whatever I'm doing is the standard. And I think that, especially as senior NCOs, that we acknowledge that and we accept that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. Look, what, you know, based off, you got a lot of experience in the Army, been a battalion sergeant major, command sergeant major for a while, got the opportunity to come down here to do your first JRTC rotation. What do you think the role of senior non-commissioned or non-commissioned officers in large-scale combat operations is?
I think I'll talk. Speaking of the sergeant major specifically role,
Yeah.
real quick. I think I came in. You know, when you ask anyone what is the role of a sergeant major, they say Met TC, or they say move to the point of friction. I don't think that's for me personally, the way I translate it, it's not. I don't think that's 100% what it is. I think what I learned, hopefully I learned over time of this rotation is how do you help maintain the momentum of the battalion. And that could be as the number one man through a door, or it could be spending a day at the BSA trying to find oil. And so,
Which either is Met TC dependent.
it's Met TC dependent.
Right.
It's all
And,
Met TC.
and hopefully you're never having to do either one.
Right.
But
right.
you could be.
But you could, and something always in between there.
Right.
And I think that at first I was, every day I'd wake up and ask my battalion commander, "Where do you need me today?" And I think we ended up making that decision on what is going to keep the battalion going in the right direction.
So I think that right there is, and I think it's true at the company level too, and arguably it's probably true at the platoon level, that dialogue between the commander or the officer and the senior NCO to get shared understanding of what the problems are in front of us is huge. I mean, I think this idea that like you as a battalion command sergeant major are going to naturally know where you're supposed to be, or the battalion commander is going to naturally know where you're supposed to be, I think is false. But through dialogue of different perspectives, we get to right more often than not. And I love this idea of momentum. I mean, you know, especially you, you're the right command sergeant major at the right place is like impulse to the formation, and whether that's in the defense, a company digging in at the critical spot for the battalion, for the brigade, the command sergeant major showing up and through expertise and energy just provides an impulse to action. I think is pretty powerful. And then certainly I can think in the offense, and particularly for your formation over the last couple of days, fighting towards that last objective to defeat the enemy, senior non-commissioned officer presence, provides impulse to action versus passivity.
Yes,
is pretty awesome. You got more thoughts on that?
No, I just think that I think the first 3 or 4 days, I was either focused on walking with the company, or I was focused on sustainment. I was like one or the other all the time. And I hope that I got to figure it out a little bit better by figuring out what is the next move and how can I make sure that we don't lose our tempo. And like I said, that sometimes meant going to the BSA, and sometimes it meant driving on a quad with a 50 cal. And so I think that it is meant TC, but I think you can't be one way or the other. You can't be on the front line all the time, and you also can't be in the BSA all the time.
You know, so for a long time at the combat training centers, leaders would come in and sort of the bumper sticker is we're going to be a learning organization, and okay, that's kind of cool, but we're in the business of winning, right? And I think people that win in combat, by default they learn, right? And so what you're describing is, I mean, you're spent a little bit of time around you and watching you. I mean, you were very focused on winning.
Yes, sir.
Right, and to win, you had to learn. But winning was first and foremost, and learning is an enabler to winning. And watching the growth in the organization at solving really the sustainment issues, so we don't culminate. So we're constantly pushing that point of culmination further out. Obviously, was I think instrumental to the brigade. And that's a multi-ball juggler problem, because it's a component of as you described, the water, particularly in this environment, ammunition, which you talked a little bit about. In the defense, it was class 4 and getting class 4 to the right spot, but it's also preserving and building combat power. And the number one way we preserve combat power is by killing the enemy.
By winning.
Right. That I think, I think a lot, you're fortunate that I think a lot of your first sergeants and platoon sergeants picked up on your example and be able to see that. So we talked about the leader development training for LSCO. What would be kind of your advice again to platoon sergeants and platoon leaders out there as they approach training, or your peers, other battalion sergeant majors that are listening?
I think I've heard it said before. It's cliche, but we got to get comfortable not being comfortable. We got to get comfortable not being, or being uncomfortable rather.
Yeah.
And I think that
privation is important.
It is, and I think that it's hard to commit to, and I think that at my battalion level,
I grew up, I was a battalion commander in Alaska. And you got to live hard to be hard.
You do, sir. You absolutely do. And I think that I think it's I think we have to commit to it, and no one wants to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that especially as senior leaders, it's real comfortable sitting and talk, drinking coffee. But I think we all have to commit to it. And I think especially senior NCOs, I think we own a lot of that.
Something you said earlier. I mean, we don't come in a unit, like we don't stand a unit up. All the privates show up.
Yeah.
This incremental. It can't be a gate, because the units people in the unit are in different places. It's like the swim groups. We have new swimmers, we have intermediate swimmers, we have advanced swimmers. So we kind of constantly have to be training and touching all of that all the time.
Yeah.
And so this idea of hardship, it has to be a degree of incremental. I mean, we got to do this smart. I mean, we can't say, hey, guess what? We're all going to do a 100-miler.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's like tossing a bunch of people into the deep end. I mean, what are some examples, if you had it to do over again, that you would do to provide that incremental exposure to privation and hardship?
I mean, I think it's every time we train. I think we should be thinking LSCO. We talked a little bit about doing the LRPs, but even more so is I really think it just needs to become the culture of. Especially, it's easy for the 10th Mountain. We should be walking everywhere we go.
Right.
And
the privation's right there for you.
It is. Yeah. And so I think that it starts with a culture of we can fight any terrain. And physical fitness. I think that if I could go back in time, for anyone that's getting ready to go to JRTC, I would have focused less on a 12 miles in 3 hour standard and more on a heavier weight. Walk as slow as we can for as far as we can.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's just a commitment to embracing the Let's Go. We all know what we need to do.
Yeah.
We just need to do it.
Yeah, I mean, this, in Mountain 6, and I talked about this a lot while he was down here. I mean, this idea of soldier load. I think there's a unit load component to this of, okay, every time we're going to move as a company, we got to move 60 ammo.
Yep.
We got to move AT4s and javelins. And once we start thinking that way, we're going to pack different as a unit, right? We probably got to weigh rucksacks as a force of habit all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think we talked about it, sir, but we messed that up the
Yeah.
first day, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we had 6 or 7 heat
Pain as a teacher.
Yes, and I think I'd put out a packing list, and the assumption was that was the minimum requirement, not the max.
Yeah.
And assumptions will get you killed.
Yeah.
And I think that we really quickly learned that lesson and changed it. But you've talked about it before, sir, like LISCO does not allow us to make assumptions. LISCO does not allow us to not understand exactly what mission command is. There's got to be a very prescribed. You can't make an error and quickly recover from it.
Yeah.
And so I think that we've got to get a lot more prescriptive on our guidance.
Yeah.
And hold people accountable to it.
Yeah, and I mean, your point earlier is we got to explain the intent behind it too. Like
Right.
we're prescriptive with a packing list because it's not just Hardman's packing list.
Right.
It's Alpha Company 214's packing list because I'm carrying a mortar round for the company and I'm carrying a Belta 7.62 for the weapon squad so that we share this load across the team. And, what's the approach march load? What's the assault load? And you can't move the same distance cross country with an approach march load that you can with an assault load.
Right.
And then it's the expectation of, okay, if I'm carrying an approach march load, I can go to this point, and then I need to transition to assault load, and then I also need to allow everybody to consolidate, reorganize to do that. But yeah, I think we got to get down to how much does everything weigh to include the chapstick in the pocket.
Absolutely. And I think that it's two-sided because we have to do that, but we also have to. The soldiers owe us. Their end of the bargain is making it what's on their back to the objective, but there's another aspect to it, and that's us making sure we get them what they need when they need it. And I think
Build and maintain trust in the processes
100%.
And systems.
The first time that you make a light packing list and it's 40 degrees out, and he doesn't get his sleeping bag,
Right.
he's
The
gonna want a
company
sleeping
trains
bag.
don't show up.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and I do think that we had a company that really figured it out, and we're going to try and get that information out as best we can because they figured out how to pack that stuff.
Yeah. And you brought this up earlier, but the more we practice it while we still have the rails on and the safety net underneath it, we can make mistakes with the system, recover, learn, adjust it, and so we don't break trust and confidence with the subordinates, but we understand where it failed
Yep.
to fix it.
Yes, sir.
And so that we have more confidence over time that this is going to work.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. What's the funniest thing that happened to you at JRTC?
I think it was probably about day 7 or 8, and I would say too that fighter management we talk about a lot with people. I think leaders have got to be careful. I definitely hit the wall, and I remember having a conversation with my commander, and at one point he asked me what we were talking about, and I think I was talking about a little league baseball game I was in at one point. But I'd completely lost track of everything that was going on.
You went to another place.
I saw the wizard. Me and the wizard were having a conversation. Yeah, overall, I think that was probably the point where I said I should probably sleep for an hour or so.
Yeah.
And I think I told our OCs, I said, if I was doing this rotation all over again, it's one of the things I would do is make sure I get some sleep a lot sooner.
Yeah, I mean, none of us would drive a car drunk, right? None of us would fly an airplane drunk. We probably shouldn't fight a battalion or a company or a platoon drunk.
Yes,
and at some point, the sleep deprivation puts us in a place that we're impaired. And it's hard managing rest cycles. And Geronimo doesn't help.
He does not. No,
He does not help.
Sir.
But that management of rest cycles is a real thing. And the days of like being a hard ranger and push through it, like we got plenty of science that says that doesn't really work.
And I think that that's why JRTC is so good, is because if you go to the field for 3 days, you don't need to eat for 3 days. I mean, you can last. What JRTC draws out of you is how are you going to sustain. And at the pace I was on, there's no way I would have sustained it. And so it's a forcing function in a controlled environment that allow you to kind of get to the end and know where it's at, so you don't ever go there again, I think.
Yeah,
so
right on.
That's the power of JRTC, I think. So.
All right, so you get closing comments, and you got a closing question if you want to ask me anything.
Okay. I think the one thing that I've absolutely learned, sir, is that for our non-commissioned officers, we've got to lead through action. And the platoon sergeants and first sergeants that I saw at their very best were the ones that, when they saw a problem, their first call was not to the battalion, not to their company, but trying to figure out how to solve that problem. Because in the LISCO environment, there's not a cop every 500 meters. There's not an ISR platform watching them. And so I think that JRTC allows us to highlight the people that are able to figure out problems. And so I think that's probably what I'm going to be focusing on, is trying to develop training scenarios to allow that to happen.
Awesome.
Yes, sir. And the question I have for you?
You got a question?
What does the future of JRTC look like as far as the LISCO environment? Are there any other things that we're planning on doing to highlight fighting in the LISCO environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, one of the things that ForceCom is driving the combat training centers to do is think about how we modernize along with the Army for the Army of 2030. And that's one of the line of efforts we have here, is to not just make it better for tomorrow, but make it better for 4 or 5 years from now. And, we have work to do, just like everybody. I mean, we're pretty introspective. We do an after-action review after every single rotation. And we have work to do with replicating the operating environment, making sure that we have the right emitters here to replicate the threat. Increasing the transparency of the battlefield through the collection platforms that we have here, so the battlefield is transparent as we expect it will be going forward. And primarily that's with electronic warfare as well as drones. We have work to do in improving how the 21st Airborne Division, the replicated division we have here, operates as a division, so that as brigades fight as part of a division, we're giving a realistic example of what a division is going to be doing. Not just in terms of what the division can do for the brigade, but frankly what the division's going to demand of the brigade. Right. And demand in terms of terrain management, I think in windows and time, requiring the brigade to maneuver on behalf of the division to enable fires and other things. Those are particularly areas that I think we need to continue to grow and improve. Improving the operational environment to frankly enable some of the capabilities that we know we're likely to have in 2030 going forward. And so those are things that we're very focused on. I think operational environment. I think a second is with what we do with the OPFOR. So the OPFOR, this rotation, they fought their command post competitively in the box, so that they could be found and targeted. We jammed their communications for 9 hours, so the Geronimo had to fight blacked out for 9 hours without any emission. Super frictionless for the enemy. I think that's realistic. It's good because it creates windows of opportunity for brigades to take advantage of. It's also good because, frankly, we're learning TTPs that we'll be able to share with the Army going forward. And also with we're getting some different equipment here, particularly replication of ADA threat going forward. So some of that will be coming online in the next year, as well as motorized capability here for the OPFOR, and those are areas that we need some work. And then finally with the OPFOR, it's that they've got to fight. We got to give the best sparring partner that we can. And so the understanding of threat doctrine out there in the world, but really we we want to give the hardest problems. So fighting through, combined arms maneuver, making contact with sensors, right? Which is something that the OPFOR does well, and we're driving them to do better. And so this rotation, we employed multiple swarms that not only collected, but were able to drop munitions. And we owe that. We owe an environment that's harder, frankly, than what we expect to encounter in combat. Going forward, we're going to make their sustainment more competitive because we want, frankly, brigades to target their sustainment in C2. That's generally what Geronimo does to brigades.
They do, yes, sir.
And then the final is we owe to continue to grow leader development at our level to help our OCTs be the best coaches possible. And so we're getting some help from the Army. We got some folks from the Combined Arms Center that are coming down, going to give us some feedback on the way we coach, help us be better coaches going forward. And I think if we expect units to be introspective, learn and grow to win, then we got to do the same thing to help our formations learn, grow, and win. So that's what we're doing going forward.
I will say, sir, that shout out to the OCs. I heard a lot of things about it before I came here. Ours were phenomenal, and they focused on coaching us. I learned a lot from them, so I appreciate the opportunity to work with them.
Not the Joint Readiness Testing Center.
No, I didn't feel that way either.
Awesome.
So,
I'm glad to hear that. I appreciate the feedback, and appreciate the way your team got after it every single day to be better, and definitely made us better. I learned a lot from this rotation. It was a ton of fun. So thanks for your time, Sergeant Major.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on The Crucible, the JRTC Experience.
The Joint Readiness Training Center is the premier Crucible training experience. We prepare units to fight and win in the most complex environments against world-class opposing forces. We are America's leadership laboratory. Again, we'd like to thank our guests for participating. This podcast was created and produced by Mr. John Mabes. It was recorded and edited by Chief Thomas Rich and researched by First Lieutenant Anthony Cho. Intro vocals were done by Mr. Robert Chopper. Special thanks to Captain Jermaine Branch and Mr. Jeff England from Public Affairs. Be sure to like and follow us on social media to keep up with the latest warfighting TTPs learned through the crucible that is the Joint Readiness Training Center. Follow us by going to https://linktr.ee/JRTC. We'd like to thank our partners at the Center for Army Lessons Learned of the Combined Arms Center, especially the JRTC COL Observations Detachment. Be sure to follow them on social media as well. Follow them at https://www.army.mil/CALL. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and review us wherever you listen or watch your podcasts, and be sure to stay tuned for more in the near future. The Crucible, the JRTC Experience, is a product of the Joint Readiness Training Center.